In this episode, I discuss how you can personally use the 4 stages of IBC concept to create unbelievable clarity on how you should get started with IBC or how you can take it to the next level. I'm Nate. I make sense out of money. This is Dollars and Nonsense. If you follow the herd, you will be slaughtered. I believe that if you fully understand that infinite banking can be practiced in different stages and that it looks totally different depending on which stage you're in, all of your questions and hangups can be easily answered. And that is the purpose of this presentation, which I have done before, but I'm gonna bring it to with a different perspective at this point. So the goal of this podcast, I'm going to review the concept that infinite banking has different stages with unique characteristics. And then the main focus at the end of it is going to be to how you can practically take this concept and help you make a decision. Because what I find for most people whenever they get started learning about infinite banking is that they really fall in love with it to some degree. Like they're very, very intrigued by it, but they're very confused as to what they should do with it. Like they have no idea how much premium they should be paying. They have no idea what they're going to be doing after they start policies. They have weird expectations as well a lot of the time. They think that if they start any size policy, then all of infinite banking is available to them. So in other words, they could start in a very early stage and have infinite banking be available to them at the grand stages. Or they start at the grand stage, but they don't understand what life's going to look like at that stage. And so that's actually the whole purpose of this, is that I'm here to promote and provide clarity. I think that if you understand what's going on, you'll know what to do. You won't have any questions about this. You'll be able to just dive in and understand what it's going to look like. So the idea of the 4 stages of IBC is based on a premise that I've felt for a very long time, and this is the best way I know to present this premise. And the premise is that everybody can benefit from infinite banking. I really do believe that. I believe that everyone across the world can benefit from becoming their own banker. The question is, at what scale does it make sense for you to get started with? At what scale should I be practicing IBC? And that's where this whole thing comes up, is that there's technically, and I've divvied up essentially 4 main different scales or stages that you can get started with IBC in, and they all have different characteristics. And whether or not you should enter certain stages will depend a lot about a couple of things. Number one is going to depend on your actual financial position, per se. What does your finances actually look like? Because sometimes the later stages are impractical. And we're going to talk about that towards the end when we start bringing this down to a decision point. So some stages are impractical for certain people, or they wouldn't even make sense to go into, first off. The other thing is psychologically. You have to fully understand that most of our decisions are made psychologically. They're not made with like any sort of objectivity. And so what that essentially means is you have to understand what you're ready for at any given moment in time. Just because you want to be in the later stages doesn't mean you should, because you still have some turmoil emotionally, like internal turmoil about this whole system, and you don't understand it quite well enough yet. So I'm going to dive into the 4 stages of IBC, and then we're going to take what we learn in the 4 stages, and then we're going to implement it with different client scenarios. I'm going to have essentially 4 steps that everyone should take whether you're doing infinite banking right now and have policies, or whether you're just learning about it right now. I'm going to end it with essentially 4 steps that you can take to implement, and I think it's going to provide tremendous clarity. So let's go ahead and dive in. So the idea of the 4 stages of IBC is that you can, and by the way, just if you're listening to the audio only, I am going to record my screen and present this on the screen as well. So you might want to go over to YouTube at some point and watch. But the idea is that there's 4 different stages, each with their own characteristics. Life does not look the same in every single stage. So we'll have our first stage we call the saver stage. The second stage is the capital builder stage. The third stage is the entrepreneur stage. And the 4th stage is the lifestyle is what we call the lifestyle stage. And each of these names I came up with, they're kind of fun, but I tried to come up with names that actually depicted what things are going to look like in each stage. And not everyone should enter every stage. It all depends on where you're at personally. But here's the other idea too. Across the board, what actually puts you in different stages is not what you are doing with the policy when you have your policy. What will put you in any of the stages is how much premium you are contributing compared to your objective capacity to contribute premium. So like in other words, if I have the ability personally, based on my financial position, what we're going to use a term a lot in this called free cash flow. And so I'm just going to define that really quick. If your free cash flow, that's the term I like to use to depict money that's coming in, income from investments, income from your earned income, and also all sorts of income is coming in, and you're living life. You have expenses, you have taxes to pay, you have charitable giving to give, you have lifestyle to live, you have vacations to go on. The idea of free cash flow is that what is the money that's left over after you've paid all of your expenses? After everything's paid for. That's what we call free cash flow. It's another term for it that you've heard me use in the past if you listen to this podcast is that free cash flow is essentially what's called capital. So if I make $200,000 and I spend $100,000 and I'm left with $100,000, that $100,000 left over to me is what we call free cash flow, and it has to do something. Right? It wasn't spent. It's sitting here. So we're going to assume in this scenario that you have $100,000 of free cash flow. That might be a huge number to some of you. That might be a small number to some of you. I don't really care. It's just a nice, easy, round number to work with. And so we're going to assume in our example that this person has what's called $100,000 of free cash flow. It's money that's going to be saved. It's going to be invested. It's going to produce capital. We have to do something with it. And so what is going to put you in any of these stages is how much premium you are going to put into a policy compared to your capacity to put in premium. So we're going to use free cash flow as kind of our benchmark. This is what we call capacity. Like if you were all in on infinite banking and you wanted this to be the central framework for your entire life, then all of your capacity is going to be $100,000. So with that understood, what puts you in the stages is not what you do with your policy. It is how much of your premium or how much premium is being committed to, how much you're actually contributing to policies compared to your capacity. Here's the trick. How much you contribute based on your capacity is going to determine what you end up doing with the policy. So how much you contribute based on your capacity will put you in the relative stages. Then once you're in that stage, based on how much you're committed to contributing, that will actually determine what you do with it. So let's go ahead and dive into that. The first stage is what we call the saver stage. And in the saver stage, there's some hallmark characteristics going on in the saver stage. First off, the saver stage is oftentimes someone who's looking at a policy just to, they're essentially just going to move in money that they want to keep safe and liquid. So this would be someone who's like, maybe they already have an emergency fund and they're going to decide to move that into a policy, something like that. I think most people should have some liquid cash capital built up someplace as a storehouse. I mean, almost everyone agrees that, the goal for most people is to get at least 6 months of capital saved up in something that's liquid and safe. And so in the saver stage, the hallmark characteristics is that it's going to be the lowest stage of commitment. And it's mainly going to be essentially using the policy as kind of your liquid savings storehouse. And that's all you really want to put in there. So you're going to be putting in money for your emergency fund. Another thing to say is I've had a lot of people start in this stage when they're looking to diversify is the fancy term. So in other words, they're like, well, I've already got money here. I got money here. I'll put a little bit of money in this whole life insurance policy because I like that it grows tax-free and that it's liquid and I can and it's safe and I can use it anytime I want. So I'm just gonna set some money into it. I'm gonna put a little bit of money into it. I'll have that be my emergency fund money. I'll diversify into this safe place. And it's oftentimes in the saver stage, you're only going to contribute money that's in the bank already, or that you would want to be in the bank. So in other words, it's not like we're going to put all of the money that we could be investing into it. It's really going to be the place where we're only going to move in money that's already in the bank. We're diversifying. So some hallmark characteristics of this stage, first off, and it should be, once you understand it, it actually becomes relatively obvious, is that you will rarely ever use the policy. And the reason you'll rarely ever use the policy in this stage is oftentimes because it doesn't even make sense to use the policy in this stage. It doesn't even make sense to use policy in this stage because you're only committing into premium. You're only paying premiums into a policy, the money that you really want to be sitting around not doing anything to begin with. It's your safe money. It's your savings account. It's your emergency fund. You're just diversifying into this safe little place. And so you'll rarely ever use the policy to do anything because in this case, maybe if the free cash flow is $100,000, maybe their saver stages, they're going to put like $15,000 a year or something into a policy, or $20,000 a year or something. They're just diversifying. They're just saving some money into the policy. The reason you'll rarely use it is because it doesn't even make sense to use it. If they've got $100,000 of free cash flow ready to them to be able to rock and roll with, and they're only putting 15, 20 grand into a policy of it, there's no reason to ever use the policy to do anything because the policy is such a small piece of your overall financial picture. So first off, in the saver stage, some hallmarks are that you'll rarely ever use it, and it will rarely ever make sense to use it because you'll have a lot of money that lives outside the policy that never enters the policy. You're just using the policy as a savings place. And not only are you rarely going to use the policy, there's also no intentionality in this stage. So there's no intentionality, which really means whenever you started this policy, you didn't have a strict, firm intention to put it to work to do anything specific. It's the smallest stage. It's money that was already in the bank to begin with. It's not like you started the policy to achieve goals and objectives. You don't have any intentionality. You're just starting it as a safe place to move money. Your intention is probably, I just want to have a safe place to put some cash. Like that's the intentionality. There's no use of the policy. We also will call this stage oftentimes kind of what we call the objective or default stage. And the reason that we call it the objective stage is because in stage one, in the saver stage, we firmly believe that if you're going to have safe liquid money to begin with, it really is, I firmly believe, the best place for you to build up liquid safe money. It's going to grow the best. It's in a tax-free environment. I really do believe it's kind of objective. Everyone should be doing this. You shouldn't leave your emergency fund sitting in a bank account. You can move the emergency fund and your safe money into a policy and start earning more return most of the time in a tax-free environment and including a death benefit. It's just the best place for this. So we call this the objective stage. It's the simplest stage. Very little intentionality is going to be happening here. And it's mainly the only money that's going to go into the policy is money that you wanted to be sitting safely somewhere to begin with, diversifying into some safety, something like that. When we jump to the next stage, stage two, which we call the capital builder stage, you take the saver stage. So you say, yeah, Nate, I do want to, have this be my safe place that I'm going to store money anyway, instead of using bank accounts, stuff like that. But you start adding some things to it. So in this case, you actually redirect cash flow to the policy and pay more. You pay more premiums, by the way, and you're redirecting cash flow that used to be accumulating somewhere else. Maybe you're using cash flow that used to be invested in IRAs or 401ks or something like that you don't want to be putting there anymore. Maybe you're redirecting cash flow that you used to set aside for a project at your house, or maybe you pay cash for cars and you've been building that up in a bank account. And so you start to redirect cash flow that used to be set aside for other purposes, and you're instead going to use it to fund a policy first before it's used. Oftentimes in this stage, you'll use the policy for personal reasons, more so than like investing in business purposes. So you're using things for personal reasons, and you'll start using the policy more often. The question is, well, why would we use the policy more often in this stage than the saver stage? It should be pretty obvious. So in the saver stage, we're only putting in money that we are trying to set aside for safety, diversification, emergency fund. There's no intentionality there because we're not really hoping to ever use it. We just are trying to save some money. In the capital builder stage, we add intentionality. So you're going to pay more into the policy. You're going to put more money in. You're going to increase your premiums because you have added intentionality. Now you are thinking of things you want to do with your policy, and you're putting money there on purpose so that you can do those things with your policy. I hope you see the difference between the saver stage and the capital builder stage. One is going to put more money in because there's things they want to accomplish with the policy. Oftentimes, as I said, these are more personal reasons, like things like, as I already brought up, like maybe we'll start using the policy for house remodels, purchase cars. Maybe we'll send our kids to school in this. So like we'll set money aside so they can to pay for their college tuition. Maybe there will be some various investments, but I mean, in reality, the capital builder stage is not going to be as focused on investing money per se. Maybe we'll pay down debt. So I'm going to pay premiums with the goal of recapturing some debt. These are more of the personal items in the capital builder stage. By the way, really quick, you can fund remodels, you can buy cars, you can pay for education, all of these things from the saver stage. You can. It just won't make any sense to do it. It won't make any sense to do those types of things from the saver stage in almost every event. The reason is because if you're going to borrow from the policy from the saver stage to go do those things, you haven't paid enough premium in to allow for that. In other words, even if there's enough money in the policy in the saver stage to go achieve those types of things, it doesn't even make sense to achieve those things yet because you'll also have a ton of money. In other words, we didn't move in the money that we would normally use to remodel the house. We didn't move in the money that we would normally use to buy cars. We didn't move in the money that we would normally use to pay for college education or make investments or pay down debt. We haven't moved any of that money into the policy yet. We've just set aside some safe liquid money. So what that means is we already have cash flow devoted to remodel projects, cars, education, investments, paying down debt. That's all occurring. So if we use the policy to do those things from the saver stage, all we're really going to do is take policy loans out for no reason because you already will have the money set aside elsewhere to do those things. This is where it catches people up all the time. They think that because they're practicing infinite banking, that there's some sort of magic of using the policy. So you'll run into people that have a whole bunch of cash sitting in the bank. They got savings here. They have all of these different things going on, and the policy is just this one little piece. And they think because this whole IBC thing is talking about using policies to pay for stuff, that I should be using my policy to pay for stuff. But in reality, they're only in the saver stage. They're just sending some money in there. So you can do all of the transactions for every stage from a saver style commitment. It just won't make any sense. You'll just be taking out policy loans to pay for a car, even though you'll take out a 50 grand policy loan to pay for a car, even though your bank account has 50 grand sitting around in it doing nothing, because you didn't actually commit to the premium levels to take the 50 grand in the bank account and move it into the policy first before you ended up using it to buy the car. So, by the way, I did a webinar on this topic, the 4 stages of IBC, which you can view, and we're going to go into more detail in that webinar that I am on this podcast in some areas, and then I'm going to add a different perspective towards the end that we don't cover in the webinar. So you might want to go kind of fill in both the gaps by looking at the webinar as well. So in the capital builder stage, this would be essentially, I'm going to come back to it, but this would be likely someone who has free cash flow of $100,000. Maybe they're going to put in $50,000 a year or something like that. It's going to be a decent level of commitment. And what should become obvious is that this is the same guy. He's choosing different levels of commitment, really, different scales to do IBC at, and you're going to get different characteristics. It should be obvious that the capital builder who's going to put in 50 grand a year is going to be using his policy to do a lot of things that the saver stage, it wouldn't make sense to use it for, because more of the money is going into policies first.
Are you tired of feeling like everyone has their hand in your pocket? At Living Wealth, we believe in challenging the status quo. After all, most of those conventional tools only seem to make someone else rich. Let us show you how to take back control by banking on yourself. Visit livingwealth.com/escapethebank. You'll receive instant access to what we call the beginner's course. This free, in-depth, easy-to-follow course teaches people how to create and profit from infinite banking. We not only discuss the philosophy and principles behind infinite banking, but also offer real-life examples to demonstrate how it works. Even folks experienced with infinite banking often tell us they learned a ton too. So, it's worthwhile regardless of your experience level. Stop letting banks and Wall Street dictate your financial future. Again, that's livingwealth.com/escapethebank to gain access to the free course today. Now back to Nate and Holly.
When we jump to the entrepreneur stage, here's where I actually feel most people think in their minds that IBC is happening. Like, this is what most people envision IBC to do. The hallmark of this is that you're going to run your system like a banking business. That's why we call it the entrepreneur stage. You're actually going to believe and understand that you are getting into the banking business. The other two stages before this, it's just policies are a great place to store some cash, to use it. We can do some things, but you're not really thinking like I'm in the banking business just yet. In the entrepreneur stage, you really start to take on the perspective that you are in the banking business. And when you launch policies, it's like starting a business from scratch. And so how this oftentimes works in the entrepreneur stage is that every dollar of your free cash flow is going into policies. So in this stage, as you would probably understand, we're going to put in $100,000 a year. If my free cash flow is $100,000, then my entrepreneur stage level, if that's the scale I want to practice it on, I'm going to be putting in $100,000 a year. This means things to people. And so this is the same guy. He's going to be living the same life, but it should be very obvious that if all of my free cash flow is going into policies, I am going to be using my policies very often. And now, why is that? Why will I use my policies all the time in the entrepreneur stage, but I would rarely ever use the policies in the saver stage? Both people think they're practicing IBC. Both people got involved because they enjoyed the thinking of infinite banking. Even the capital builder stage, what's going to be the big difference? Of course, it should be obvious to all of us that this guy at $100,000 a year, all of his free cash flow going in, there is no money living outside of policies to do things. He has moved all of the money that would normally be used to do things into policies first. So it actually becomes the default option, which is why I consider it like starting a business in this stage. You're actually in the banking business where you have transitioned. In the entrepreneur stages where you make a full transition to where policies become the default. So policies become the default in the entrepreneur stage. If all of your free cash flow is going into policies first, they become the default option for everything. So this means that every investment you make in the future is going to come from policies. Why is that? Why is every investment going to come from policy loans? It should be obvious because there is no money living outside the policies to make investments. We are on purpose moving all of our free cash flow in because we have at the forefront of our mind, we want to be using policies to fund everything. We're operating in the banking business. So every investment is going to be purchased from the policy. There's a ton of intentionality. And not only every investment, but of course, every capital purchase. And by the way, when I say capital purchase, that really means, things like cars and, remodels and things that in the capital builder stage we're going to be using. Essentially, all of the big major purchases of life are going to be funded from policies. And every investment we make is going to be funded from policies. And there's going to be a large amount of intentionality because we are choosing to move all of our money every year into policies before it's used. That's the idea of it. So it's going to look different than the saver stage. The reality is, in the saver stage, you can use policy loans to do things. It just doesn't make any sense yet. You're putting in 15 grand into your policy premium and you've got 85 grand that's going to do all these other things for you. You will rarely ever just run into an opportunity where it makes sense to use policies. And that's where a lot of people have huge questions, is that they're actually living in the saver stage or the capital builder stage, and they're thinking they should be using the policy more. They think that I should really be funding all of these things from policies. But they're always hung up. They're like, well, why would I use policies to fund this investment or to fund this purchase when I have money in the bank that I could be using to fund it and not pay policy loan interest? And we'd say, you're right. In the saver stage and the capital builder stage, if that's the amount of premium you're contributing, you are definitely going to run into that question all the time because you haven't committed to the level where it makes sense to use policies to fund most things. Because you'll automatically, by default, have money accumulating in a bank account. Because you're not, if I have $100,000 of free cash flow and I'm only putting in $50,000 of premium, that means $50,000 is going to accumulate in somebody else's bank, and you're going to run into the question: should I use my policy or should I use the bank account? And you'll actually come to the correct conclusion that oftentimes you just use the bank account because there's no reason to borrow from a policy to do something where you have money sitting around in a bank doing that thing. The final stage is the most complex stage, and it's a stage that probably only 10% of, maybe 20% of IBCers should really enter it in. So some people would say, well, Nate, if you're using all of your free cash flow already contributing to policies and you're in the entrepreneur stage, where is there left to go? How can I go to a different stage in the lifestyle stage? In the lifestyle stage, you actually start to redirect money that was being spent on various other things. So now instead of only moving in what we call free cash flow, money that's left over after things are spent and after you do things, you start to redirect money that you had historically been spending on various things. Oftentimes you'll see people enter the lifestyle stage when they start using the policy to fund things like charitable giving or maybe income taxes. These big expenses, per se, if you want to call the charitable giving an expense, these larger ticket items that are just part of lifestyle cost. By the way, if I have $100,000 of free cash flow, the assumption is that is the amount of money that's left over after I pay my taxes. That's money that's left over after I do my charitable giving. It's whatever is left over after you do the things you're doing. That's what we call free cash flow. So in the lifestyle stage, you start to redirect money that is above and beyond free cash flow into premium. Now remember, I just gotta keep hammering this home. You can be in the saver stage, capital builder stage, and entrepreneur stage and take policy loans out to do whatever you want. You can borrow money to give to charity. You can go borrow money to give to Uncle Sam. Give is a loose term. You can borrow money to do all of these things. You can borrow money to live your lifestyle in these other stages. I'm just saying it doesn't actually make much sense. And you're going to have to trust me for a little bit because I don't have enough time to go into all the numbers. If you want to go watch the webinar that I recorded when I dive into numbers, you'll understand what I mean when I say it doesn't make a lot of sense. So go watch that webinar to understand that. But essentially what I'm saying is you can do all of this, but in the lifestyle stage, you're actually taking, let's say this person gives 50 grand a year to charity. You could, and he's already paying $100,000 a year in premium from, that's his free cash flow, and he's in the entrepreneur stage, and he said, I want to level up even one more. Well, all the free cash flow is going to policy premiums. What does that make? How is he going to operate this? Well, he's going to say, well, what if I put in an extra 50 grand every year and borrowed 50 grand every year to give? So now I'm actually putting in $150,000 a year of premium, even though my free cash flow is only 100. And I'm going to take out 50,000 a year to give to charity. What you guys should see in this is that what automatically happens in that instance is you start to build out what we call a strategic loan balance. A strategic loan balance. And so what that means is if he has $100,000 of free cash flow and he's putting that all into premium and he decides to open another $50,000 policy and use that to give to charity and he's going to borrow 50 grand a year from his system, we don't technically have cash flow to repay the policy loan. We don't have any, in other words, the cash flow that we normally were giving to charities, we chose to pay a premium with it every year. And then we borrowed from the policy to give to the charity, but we don't have cash flow to pay the premium at 150 grand and repay the policy loan. So what occurs is you automatically start to accumulate what we call a strategic loan balance. So anytime you're in the lifestyle stage, it almost always assumes that you are creating a strategic loan balance. And the reason we call it a strategic loan balance is because most of the time it only makes sense to be doing this if we expect that at some point in the future you will receive a windfall. And if you want to learn more and more about strategic loan balances, I did a podcast that you can go listen to as well, and you'll see it happening in real life if you go watch the webinar where we dive into actual numbers. You'll see what it means to have a strategic loan balance, which is essentially saying, hey, I'm going to borrow money from the policy to give to the charity. I know there's going to be a loan balance, and I'm just not going to repay it right now. I'm not going to intentionally repay. I'm not going to set up a repayment schedule. I don't have the cash flow to do it, but I expect to be able to repay it in the future with some form of windfall. And it could be anything from selling assets in the future, getting out of retirement programs, or in the future, it could be selling a business down the road. It could be getting an inheritance. I'm just merely saying that there's all different kinds of windfalls. And most of the time, I believe that it makes sense for almost everyone who's practicing IBC at a high level to operate with some sort of strategic loan balance. In this stage, it's obviously complex, and that's the case with every stage. When you graduate from one stage to the next, you increase your premium level. Obviously, you have to increase premium level because that's what puts you in the stages, and you increase complexity. Of course, with lifestyle being the most complex stage, and it's very strategic. So this is the stage where you can't really do it on your own. Like you'll want someone like Nate sitting in your corner, helping you make decisions, putting things on a spreadsheet, and deciding if it even makes sense for you, because it's very strategic. You don't just wind up in the lifestyle stage. You strategically go there for very specific reasons and purposes. So these are the 4 stages of IBC. One more thing to note before I dive into how to use this to actually make sense of your life is that in almost every instance, people really do think that stages 3 and 4 are really what IBC is all about. That's what they think. And I think that it's fair to think that, by the way. Like, people think that I want to use my policy to fund lots of things. Like, I'm sending my kids to a private high school or to college, and it's gonna be $40,000 a year. I don't want to just write a check and lose the $40,000 forever. I want to use my policy to fund it. And so they're thinking like the entrepreneur stage. They're thinking like they're in the lifestyle stage. They want to use their policies to do those things. They think it sounds great. They think it sounds cool. However, what stands between them actually doing the entrepreneur and lifestyle stages that they want to be in, and what keeps them in the saver and the capital builder stage, is a line in the sand. And the line in the sand runs up and down. If you see the screen, where we draw a line in between stage 2 and stage 3. And a nice, deep, dark red line in between stage 2 and 3. And that line represents what I call the fear of premium. The fear of premium. There's all sorts of reasons to be afraid to start policies and to expand and to commit and do different things. Most of those fears are irrational. They're based on some level of ignorance. They think that if I start a policy where I do contribute $100,000 a year, then I have to contribute $100,000 every year, or else there's some sort of negative consequence, which I've beaten to death in this podcast so many times. But nonetheless, they envision and they are compelled by the entrepreneur and lifestyle stages, where they're paying lots of premiums and they're using the policy to do lots of things. And there's a lot of benefit to be there. But what stands and slaps them in the face, that stands right before them, is the fear of premium. They are uncomfortable. It's a psychological thing. And so there's some sort of fear of premium involved that keeps them stuck somewhere in the saver to capital builder stages, where they just can't really commit to going all in for this, which is totally fine. I just think it should be known that that's what keeps people in the saver to capital builder stage. So what this means is that if you are afraid to expand the system and commit to higher levels of IBC, you just have to accept that it's not going to make sense to do some of these things, and that you should stop asking me to help you do it. I don't mean to be offensive with that at all. I'm just merely saying, like, there is no reason for someone who's in the saver or the capital builder stage to come to walk up to me and say, Nate, I want to start using my policy to give to charity. I heard that's a cool strategy. Nate, I want to go pay my income taxes with it. I heard that's a cool strategy. Nate, I want to use my policy to make every investment from here on out. Got here, that's a cool strategy. I'm like, yeah, all of these are cool strategies, but you have free cash flow of $100,000. You're only putting in premiums of $50,000. You have $50,000 accumulating in a bank account every year. And on top of that, with the free cash flow, by the way, it assumes you've already paid with other money your charitable giving. You've already paid your income taxes. There is just no reason for people in the low stages of commitment to start doing the transactions that make sense in the higher stages of commitment. Typically you have to increase your contributions to the policies. That's called premium. You have to increase your premium levels to unlock new uses. You don't start using the policy to do things to unlock future stages. You increase your premiums, and then those transactions start to make sense. So that's one of the things I wanted to mention, is most of the time you have this psychological fear of premium involved. One last thing that I want to move on to my next 4 points, and then we'll wrap it up. Inside the 4-stage environment, the reason why I think it's such a powerful thing is because you can start anywhere you want to. And so when somebody comes and they start to try to validate infinite banking, or they're trying to investigate infinite banking and see if it's for them, see if it makes sense, most of the critics are making a fool of themselves because they think it's an all or nothing thing. So they'll assume that IBC is only the entrepreneur stage. And so they'll say, well, it doesn't make sense to put all the money into policies first. Or all I'm trying to bring up is that a lot of the time people will come and they'll try to criticize infinite banking. You have many critics talk about it. The rate of return is not as good, all of it is misplaced. But if they would just watch this, I think they would understand. A policy fits into everyone's situation depending on at what level they want to practice IBC at. It is true that not everyone should go to the entrepreneur stage. Not everyone's ready for it. It cannot even make sense for some people to go there. It's not objective anymore, by the way. Like, in other words, there's no way to objectively prove that you should be in the entrepreneur stage. The only one that's kind of objectively proven is the saver stage, where you just contribute money that's already sitting in someone else's bank, and you say the policies are going to produce more value for me than letting the money sit in other safe places over long periods of time. And I think that's absolutely true and very provable. As you go up the stages, you add layers of complexity and strategy that don't make sense for everybody. And I think that's great. That doesn't mean that you should throw the baby out with the bathwater. It just simply means that not every stage everyone should commit to, because sometimes you have practical concerns. Sometimes you have complexity concerns and different things. So just understand that really, it doesn't matter where you start. You should just start someplace and then move on from there. The whole purpose of this, by the way, is to provide clarity to you to help you come to a decision on what you should do for yourself. And so in light of what we just talked about, I think that there's essentially 4 steps that everyone should take to generate a clarity around their decision for what they want to do. So the first thing you should do is lay out the facts. If you want me to be kind of a consultant to you, come to me with some of the facts of your life, of your financial life. What I find, and it's just absolutely true, anybody talking to a financial guy is worried, not everybody, but a lot of the time they're worried to actually tell me how well off they are. But I think it's funny. It's fair too, right? You know what? You'll talk to somebody, they won't actually tell you, and not everyone's like this, but a lot of people, they won't tell you what they actually have going on because they're worried that I'm going to sell them on something. They're worried that I'm going to get them into a big sucker policy, get that commission. And I'm just merely saying, well, how are you going to make a decision if you're just living in a dream world? Like, that's the reality. Like, they'll come to me, they'll ask me to give me to make a decision, but then they actually don't want to tell me the facts. They don't want to know how much money they're making. They don't want me to know how much money they have. And I just think it's funny. Like, what am I going to help you then? You're creating like a hypothetical scenario that makes no sense to you with wrong facts that you've dumbed down dramatically so that I don't tell you to start a big policy. I'm not going to tell you to start a big policy. That's why the whole point is that you can start anywhere you want to on here. The idea, though, is that you should make a decision based on real facts. You lay out the facts. That is, what is my actual free cash flow? Come up with a number. Don't be shy. Don't give some sort of super lowball number. Like, the reality is, I make X amount. I got taxes. I got charitable giving. Our lifestyle is approximately this. So in a nice rough estimate, we're going to assume, my free cash flow is $100,000. I make $300. We spend and pay taxes and all this. We spend $200,000 on all these other taxes, charitable giving, lifestyle, and I'm left with $100,000. Great. Okay, so that's your free cash flow. Lay out the facts. Okay. You also may have other facts beyond just cash flow. There's always 2 places to pay premiums from. There's 2 places. One is cash flow, which we've already talked about, your income, your earnings. There's going to be some cash flow involved in how you could start a policy, but there's also assets involved. So there's always 2 places that money can come from. So you may also come to me and you just lay out the facts. Most of the time, IBC is more concerned if you're actually going to, in other words, you may have a big real estate portfolio, and you may have equity in businesses, or you may have what we call some illiquid assets. Those are great for me to know, but they're not going to impact our decision on what we should start with policy-wise. The assets we're really looking for is assets that are just sitting around not doing much, like bank account assets or possibly, brokerage account assets or things that you just don't want. You don't think they're going to be a part of your future. So you say, we lay out the facts. You say, I've got $100,000 of free cash flow, and maybe I've got $1 million of real estate, but I've got $300,000 of kind of liquid assets I'm looking to do something with. So first, we just simply lay out the facts. Then you start to place yourself in each stage based on the facts. So now is whenever you start to figure out, okay, well, what would each stage look like for me? What would each stage look like for me? We haven't decided anything. We're just trying to figure out what would it look like. So we would say, well, okay, so you have $300,000 in liquid assets. How much liquidity do you normally want to keep on hand as kind of an emergency fund or something of that sort? How much liquidity would you want to keep in hand? And of your $100,000 of free cash flow, do you normally set money aside into those liquid safe places just to kind of accumulate some money as you move forward in those liquid safe places? So we would say, okay, right now, I think we should both at least come to the agreement that the money that's currently sitting in like my safe emergency fund, or I like to call it an opportunity fund as well, and even get a higher amount of money above just the emergency fund in that liquid cash reservoir. But if we can both at least agree that policies are a better spot to build my liquid safe money into the future, then we can come out, okay, and we say this is our default stage. Stage 1 is kind of the default stage, where really, I don't know if we're going to go into stage 2 right now. I don't know if we're going to go into stage 3. We certainly aren't going to start in stage 4. But at least we're going to place ourselves in stage. So stage 1 is kind of the default. We'd say, I think we should at least move that liquid safe money that you kind of want to keep safe and liquid, and maybe some of the free cash flow that you would normally set aside into that liquid pool. Maybe it's 10 or 15 grand a year of income, and $100,000 of your liquid assets is kind of the money you want to keep in reserve. And so we just build a policy around those things. That's how we would build the policy. Then it actually starts to get complex a little bit whenever you're trying to place yourself in the capital builder stage, the entrepreneur stage. The capital builder stage, stage 2, you could place yourself in stage 2 by just saying, hey, Nate, maybe I'm not ready to move all of the money of my free cash flow in, but I do want to be able to pay cash for cars, remodel the house. I do want to have some capital. I want to be able to send my kids to school. So we say, okay, well, now instead of putting in 15 to 20 grand a year out of cash flow and move the liquid assets in, now maybe we'll put in 40 grand a year because we have some intentionality. So we're not going full on entrepreneur stage where everything's going in right away, but we are going into kind of the stage where I want to put in more money because I actually have some intentions to go use it to achieve the capital endeavors of my life. Conceptually, that would be like 50 grand a year of contributions or something like that. And then stage 3, and that's really, by the way, if you're starting out, stage 3 would be the highest you would go. So stage 3 would be like, okay, yeah, Nate, you know what? I am committed. I am excited about this. I've spent 6 months listening to your podcast, Nate. It's awesome. I believe in this thing. I want to dive in the entrepreneur stage. And we'd say, yeah, we're going to start a policy with about $100,000 of room available to fit capital in each and every year. And you're going to put all of that money in. So now we have we could talk about stage 4, but if we're just getting started with IBC, you wouldn't start out in stage 4. You really choose between stage 1, 2, and 3. So you place yourself in each stage. You just get a little mental note of here's what it would, the premium amounts and what makes sense to be in each stage, and understand the characteristics of each stage, like what we're likely going to be using the policy to do, what makes sense to use the policy to do. And then the third thing, after you've placed yourself in each stage, is you envision what life would look like. And while you're envisioning what life would look like, you're essentially saying, what do I want to be able to do? Remember, there's not just one size fits all in the infinite banking world. You start to envision what life will look like in each stage. So in the saver stage, you would envision, I just have this awesome policy. It's growing tax-free. It's like a safe diversification tool. And when I retire one day, I'll have this awesome pool of money that's not correlated to the market, and I get all these benefits from it with a death benefit that I wouldn't normally have. That's guaranteed for the rest of my life. So I'm like, yeah, that sounds nice. That sounds better than what I have right now. Then we could jump up to the capital builders. You start to envision what life would look like. You say, well, yeah, I'm going to be putting in more premium dollars, which means I'm going to have to start taking more policy loans out. Maybe I'll use it to fund cars in the future so I don't have to go to the bank, or maybe I'll go on vacation sometimes with it, or we'll have money to remodel the house. You start to envision kind of what life would look like in that area. And then obviously with stage 3, you're like, man, I'm going to put all of my money into policies, and I'm going to use the policies to fund really everything in my life, any capital purchase. Now, you're not going to be funding lifestyle expenses just yet. That's in stage 4, but you're going to be funding all of every investment we make, every capital purchase. But you also have to note, yeah, it's going to be a high level of commitment. Like, I'm going to really go in on this thing. So not everyone's ready for that. Like, man, will I be stressed out? Will it produce anxiety for me? So you start to envision what life would look like, the pros and cons. And what is compelling to you? What is compelling? Are you compelled by the safety of the policy and the growth of the policy and the tax-free nature of the policy? Then maybe the saver stage is for you. Are you compelled with being able to get out of debt and remodel the house and have liquid money available to be able to use anytime? Then stage 2 is great. Are you compelled by funding every investment you make into the future and having all of the investment returns go back into the policy and having it be like a banking business? Then that's what you should try to commit to. And by the way, that was actually my 4th step, by the way. I wrote it down in stage 3. But what is compelling to you? What are you most compelled by? What are you most compelled by is the step 4. And that's how you make the decision. What are you most compelled by? And then I would just ask that you would commit. Just say, what am I most compelled by? Okay, that's what I'm going to do. Life is easier if you just latch on to a system and implement it. That's all I'm trying to say. So latch onto a system and implement it. By the way, you don't have to, you could say I'm very compelled by stage 3. I'm just not yet ready for that type of, I'm not ready to go all in yet. And that's perfectly fine. That's what I'm saying is lay out the facts, place yourself in each stage, understand like what would be the premium amounts and how would it operate, envision what life would look like, decide what you're most compelled by, but you may have to take a back step and say, well, maybe psychologically, I'm just not ready for that yet, but Nate, and that's what you would tell me. In our planning, you would say, well, I really do want to be stage 3. I don't know if I'm ready to commit to that level yet. So I'm going to start out in stage 2. This is what it's going to look like. But I do want to get to stage 3. Well, let me just get my feet wet first and understand how it's going to work. Then that's great. I'm just merely saying you get to decide what you're most compelled by. This is why I don't think it makes sense to lay out facts that aren't real. So many times people are afraid to tell me how well off they're really doing because they're afraid that I'm going to sell them on something. I'm not a good salesperson. I'm not a good salesperson. Just lay out go through the steps, decide for yourself. I don't want to have to be the guy who tells you what to do. By the way, sometimes it's not practical in every situation to start out in stage 3 or 4. So the idea is, I've talked to a lot of clients who they're like, I've got some capital sitting around. Maybe they don't have a lot of free cash flow, but they have a lot of assets and they would like to move it. They like, theoretically, they want to be like in stage 3. They're like, Nate, I want to move all of this money into policies first. And then I'm going to go, live my life. I'm going to invest money. I'm going to, remodel the house. I'm going to do all of these things that I hear. I'm going to buy cars. I'm going to pay down some debt. I'm going to do all these things that IBC talks about. And I want to put all the money in. But you can sometimes run into practical issues. Like you can run into timing problems. Like they could say, Nate, I'm looking to invest in a few deals that are coming my way. I'd love to get the money into policies first and then invest. I just don't know if I have enough time. And you very well might be right. Like, in other words, just because we want to move the money in and we agree theoretically that stage 3 life is what you're most compelled by, doesn't mean you're automatically going to get to operate at stage 3. It may be impractical at the time based on you lay out the facts, you place yourself in each stage, you envision what life will look like. And in that stage, you realize, well, my life would look like maybe I've got 500,000 of liquid assets. I don't have much free cash flow right now, but I've got a lot of liquid assets. I want to move it in. But maybe the best plan is to move it in at like $100,000 a year for 5 years. But then you envision that and you're like, well, I actually need to use a big chunk of this to do some deals right now. So we'd say, I can't really move it all in right now. And then we say, that's great, move in a less amount. But if you follow the steps, lay out the facts, place yourself in each stage, envision what life will look like and decide what you're most compelled by. Or you could also say, not only what you're most compelled by, or what is most practical. So you find out what are you most compelled by or what is most practical based on your exact situation and upcoming capital needs. And that's how you come to a decision. Fundamentally, though, it actually doesn't really matter too much where you start. This is why I don't put a lot of emphasis on really trying to spend a ton of time on, deciding your initial policy premium, window of premium paying ability. I just wouldn't devote a ton of mental energy to it beyond just this, because you can always start more policies. If you start off in stage 1, you can jump into stage 2, you can jump into stage 3 anytime you want by just adding new policies to the mix. Then you can go to stage 4 later on. It doesn't really matter where you start. It matters where you end up in the coming few years. That's going to determine where you're at. So you just get started. It's not an all or nothing thing. So I hope this has been beneficial. Remember, we have a webinar. If you haven't watched the webinar, you need to go watch it. It's gonna be some of this review, of course, because I did this same thing on the webinar at the beginning of the podcast. But I then dove into a whole bunch of real numbers with real scenarios. This one was more focused on the 4 steps that you can determine to how you should decide to move forward in a lot of ways. But I hope it's been beneficial. The idea that there are different stages of infinite banking that you can commit to, each with different characteristics that you decide what you're most compelled by and what you're most comfortable with, I think is a fundamental thing in determining whether or not you get started. So many people think that IBC requires a stage 3 life and they're too emotionally and psychologically concerned, and maybe they have valid anxieties and concerns. They're afraid of premium still. There's all these things, headwinds coming in, so they just never do anything. They actually just say, it's not for me, forgetting that IBC is essentially for everybody. The question at hand before you is, at what scale do you want to practice it at? There is kind of a basic saver objective stage 1 scale that everyone should be doing. And then you can add complexity and strategy down the line if it makes sense and if you're comfortable with it, and grow from there. You don't have to start at some crazy high level. I hope this has been helpful. It's been a pleasure. By the way, if you are benefiting from this content, we really do believe we're putting out some of the best content in the IBC space. We strive to do a great job, and it would just mean the world to us if you would subscribe on YouTube, like our episodes on YouTube. Same thing with Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Leave us a rating, leave us a review. It's the best way to tell the algorithms that this is some good stuff. So we appreciate you all. Thanks for listening. This has been Dollars and Nonsense. If you follow the herd, you will be slaughtered.
Listener, one last thing before you go. Start your journey towards financial security and wealth today. Visit livingwealth.com/escape the bank. Upon completing this course, you'll have all the information that you'll need to see if infinite banking is right for you. Again, go to livingwealth.com/escape the bank.